Well, I get asked a lot of questions about buying a business, so I'm going to do a Q&A video. I'm just going to answer the questions you've asked me about buying a business. How long have you been selling businesses? Oh, come on. Have you not watched one of my videos? I've been a business broker for almost 20 years. I've sold hundreds of businesses. I don't actually know how many I've sold, but it would be in the hundreds. Before that, I was a business coach, professional business coach, and I was a business mentor on a volunteer basis. The first question is, will banks lend on a business like they lend on an investment property? Well, the answer to that is yes and no. They will still look at the business with an element of security, an element of equity, but if you can get up to 45, 50% lent on the business, you're doing well. Now, clearly on an investment property, you can get much, much more than that. So you will need to have a deposit, you will need to have some form of equity, either in a home or in cash, before you can buy the business. So should I buy a business or stay in a job? Well, remember, job stands for just over broke. You work long, you work hard, you work strong hours, and what do? You're making someone else rich. So no. What you do is you should be buying a business. Mind you, I would say that. I'm a business broker. I sell businesses. I've had 20 years of selling businesses, and before that, I owned my own business for 15, 18 years. So yes, I would say buy a business. Don't have a job. What camera do you use? DJI Osmo Pocket 3 and the DJI Action 5 Pro and the little microphones that go with it. So if I'm buying a manufacturing business, am I liable for the faulty products that the previous owner made? Well, the answer is no, you're not, and you should include a clause in the sale and purchase agreement. It's called a liability clause, and that transfers the liability for the products made by the previous owner or to the previous owner, and it remains with the previous owner. Sure, you'll have to do a bit of liaising to make it work, but essentially speaking, if the previous owner has made product that fails, it's his responsibility to rectify it. Now, the next question is, what type of lawyer should I use in a business sales transaction? Well, you should definitely use a lawyer, and just any lawyer is better than no lawyer. But what you are looking for is lawyers experienced in business sales transactions, lawyers experienced in contracts, lawyers who understand how business works. It's probably better to avoid lawyers that specialize in family law or conveyancing of houses and things like that, and find a specialist business contracts lawyer. Definitely use a lawyer. Be a bit silly trying to buy a business without one, to be fair. Okay, so this is a bit of a long-winded question, but it is a good question. When looking at a business I am, in the financial performance, looking at the EBIT or the EBITDA, does this have GST on the difference between the sales and the expenses taken out before this or still to come after this? So I think the bigger question is around the way accounts are presented. Now, I'm not an accountant, and different accountants will present things in different ways. But essentially speaking, the accounts that you see should be excluding any tax, especially if you're talking a profit is an EBIT. Now, EBIT stands for earnings before interest and tax. Now, include the P and the D and the A, you get earnings before interest, tax, proprietor's wage, depreciation and amortization. Now, no matter how you shake it, when you present a profit, it should be excluding tax, and that obviously includes GST, because GST is a tax. Now, if you're unsure, get a full copy of the accounts. Now, in the accounts are what they call statements of the way the accounts are presented. I can't remember the exact term they use, but the accountant basically tells you the way and the accounting methodology they have used to present the accounts. And that will be very clear in there whether it includes tax or excludes tax. As I've said, probably excludes tax. Very rare to find a set of accounts that include tax. If you're getting value from this video, and I certainly hope you are, there's a button just for people like you. It's called the like button, looks like that, just down there. There's also the thanks button and of course the subscribe. If you want to click on any one of those or all three of those, that would be greatly appreciated. Back to the questions. So the next question is rather an interesting one. I get asked, is it mandatory to register a company before buying a business? Well, I'm not quite sure what they're asking, but the short answer is you can't have a company without registering it. So yes, if you want a company, it's mandatory to register it. When do you do that as part of the process? Well, as long as your company registration is done on settlement and you're registered for GST, back to the GST question about zero rating, you're fine. So no, you can register a company anytime during the process, but remember, you can't have a limited liability company without registering it. Do I have to employ the staff when I buy a business? Well, no, you don't. You get the choice. You can take on who you want at whatever rates you want. There's not a compulsory have to employ the staff, but there is an exception to that. And that's what's defined in the Employments Act as a vulnerable employee. Now, vulnerable employees tend to be employees whose jobs can be contracted out. So they're cleaners, security guards, and people like that. So provided the staff are not vulnerable employees or classed as vulnerable employees, it's okay for you not to employ them. And you can offer them terms, any terms that you want. Do I need to be qualified to own a business? Well, no, you don't. You don't have to have a business qualification to own a business. However, some businesses require qualifications. In other words, you can't be a mechanic or a plumber without the appropriate qualifications. And some town councils, some city councils require certain licensing before you can run a business. For example, a liquor license and a food safety license and things like that. But the very short answer to the question is you can effectively be a business owner, you can own a business without a formal business qualification. So is GST paid on a business sale? Well, the answer is no, it's not. Now, provided both parties are registered for GST at the time of supply, GST is rated 0. Now, I've done a full video on GST and how it relates to business sales, and have a look around the channel, you'll find it somewhere. And finally, do I need to pay a deposit when I buy a business? Well, the short answer to that is no, you don't. Deposits have to be agreed on between the seller and the buyer, and if both parties agree that a deposit isn't going to be paid, then you don't have to pay a deposit. But there are some very compelling reasons why you should pay a deposit, and they will help you get the business that you want. What do I mean by that? Well, have a look at that video up there. I've done a whole video on how you should treat deposits and the best way to use the deposits, and it will help explain it. But the very short answer is no, you don't have to pay a deposit on the sale of a business, but perhaps you should, or not. Have a look.